A military plane just crashed into my ranch lake, and what did the powerful HOA president Sharon do? She called the cops to arrest me. She thought her HOA could crush me. She thought I'd have to sell my ranch. She was wrong. Dead wrong. The explosion shook all of Pine Hollow, but it was nothing compared to what was about to happen to Sharon's HOA empire. By the way, let me know where you're watching from. Anyone else ever faced off against a crazy HOA? The ground trembled beneath my feet as I dropped my tools and sprinted toward the lake, my heart pounding with each step. When I reached the shore, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, partially submerged in my usually peaceful lake, was an enormous experimental transport plane, the XR-75 Goliath. The thing was over 50 meters long, its massive frame creating waves that lapped violently against the muddy banks. Black smoke billowed from its engines, creating a dark column that reached toward the sky like an accusatory finger. The acrid smell of burning fuel filled my nostrils as I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just any plane. This was a classified military prototype, and it had just turned my quiet ranch into ground zero of what would become the most insane neighborhood dispute in Pine Hollow's history. Before I could even think about calling for help, I heard the familiar whir of an electric motor. Sharon Palmer appeared on her custom golf cart, her perfectly styled blonde hair somehow unmoved by the chaos around us. She pointed a manicured finger at me and started screaming accusations before she'd even come to a complete stop. "Noah Bennett, I knew you were up to something illegal. First you refused to sell your land, and now this? You're endangering our entire community." Her voice was shrill enough to compete with the sirens that were beginning to wail in the distance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A military aircraft had just crashed into my lake, and Sharon's first instinct was to blame me for it. Sharon whipped out her phone with the speed of a gunslinger and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report suspicious activity at the Bennett Ranch. There's been an explosion, and I have reason to believe the owner is involved in something dangerous." She shot me a triumphant look as she continued feeding lies to the dispatcher. Within minutes, Officer Ryan Foster arrived, his patrol car kicking up dust as he skidded to a stop. Ryan and I had been friends since high school, but even he looked concerned as he surveyed the scene. Sharon immediately pounced on him, demanding my arrest and rattling off a list of imaginary crimes she'd apparently been compiling in her head. "He's been conducting illegal experiments. This is probably some kind of terrorist activity. You need to search his property right now." The situation escalated quickly when the military arrived. Within 30 minutes, the entire lake area was swarming with soldiers in tactical gear. They established a perimeter around the crash site, their faces grim behind protective masks. A stern-looking officer approached us, introducing himself as Colonel David Brooks. Sharon immediately tried to take control of the narrative, but the colonel silenced her with a single raised hand. "Ma'am, this is now a military operation. I need everyone except Mr. Bennett to clear the area immediately." Sharon's face turned an interesting shade of purple, but she had no choice but to comply. As she retreated to her golf cart, I heard her muttering to another Silver Ridge resident about how she'd get rid of that farmer soon enough. Ryan pulled me aside while the military team began their initial assessment of the crash. "Noah, I know this isn't your fault, but Sharon's been pushing hard for your arrest. She's been calling the department almost daily with complaints about your ranch." He glanced over at Sharon, who was now holding court with a group of HOA residents at the edge of the perimeter. "Between you and me, we're all getting pretty sick of her power trips. But she's got connections, and she knows how to work the system." I clenched my fists, thinking about why I'd left the city 5 years ago, after my father's death. I'd come here seeking peace, wanting nothing more than to work the land and honor my family's legacy. Now that peace was under serious threat. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the crash site, I was finally released after hours of questioning. The investigators had reviewed my security footage and confirmed I had nothing to do with the crash. But as I walked back to my truck, I overheard Sharon boasting to her followers, "This is just the beginning. That land is worth millions for the resort development, and I'll make sure we get it. If he won't sell willingly, we'll find other ways to convince him." My jaw tightened as her words sank in. This wasn't about the plane crash or community safety. This was about money and power, and Sharon had just declared war. That night, I sat at my computer and ordered a state-of-the-art security camera system. If she wanted to play dirty, I needed to be prepared. What do you think those cameras would capture first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my doorstep. Sophie Carter, a freelance journalist who'd recently moved to Silver Ridge, stood there with a notebook in hand and frustration written all over her face. "Mr. Bennett, I heard about what happened yesterday. I'm not here about the plane crash, though. I'm here because Sharon Palmer just fined me $500 for planting the wrong type of flowers in my own garden." She showed me the citation, complete with Sharon's signature and an official HOA seal that looked like it belonged on a royal decree. "I've been investigating her for weeks now. Did you know she was involved in a lawsuit for misusing HOA funds 3 years ago? Somehow she managed to bury the whole thing." This revelation didn't surprise me, but it did give me hope. Maybe I wasn't fighting this battle alone after all. Sophie and I compared notes over coffee, and the picture that emerged was disturbing. Sharon had been systematically targeting residents who didn't fall in line with her vision for Silver Ridge. Those who challenged her found themselves buried under fines, citations, and legal threats. "She's built herself a little kingdom," Sophie explained, "and she rules it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove." As we talked, I noticed movement outside my window. Sharon was pacing on her deck, engaged in what appeared to be a heated phone conversation. Even from a distance, I could see her gesticulating wildly. I cracked the window slightly and caught fragments of her conversation. "Of course I have everything under control. This little kingdom of mine is about to deliver a major contract, you'll see." The call ended with her angrily throwing her phone onto a deck chair. That afternoon, I discovered the full extent of Sharon's reach when my backup generator suddenly sputtered and died. I'd been running on generator power because mysteriously my main electrical connection had been shut off. When I called the power company, they informed me that they'd received a complaint about safety concerns related to the crash, and my service had been suspended pending an investigation. The representative sounded apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but when the HOA president raises safety concerns, especially after an incident like yesterday's, we have to take it seriously." I hung up, my blood boiling. Sharon had literally cut off my power, forcing me to rely on expensive generator fuel just to keep my refrigerator running and my security cameras operational. Things got worse when I woke up the next day to find my property littered with garbage. Someone had dumped several bags of trash just inside my fence line during the night. As I surveyed the mess, I noticed something interesting. Mixed in with the regular household waste were several documents bearing the Silver Ridge HOA letterhead. I carefully photographed everything before beginning the cleanup. Among the papers, I found draft letters to various city officials, all painting me as a danger to the community. Sharon wasn't just trying to inconvenience me, she was building a case to have me forced off my land. Each piece of evidence I collected painted a clearer picture of her systematic campaign against me. Sophie proved to be a valuable ally in ways I hadn't expected. She had a talent for getting people to talk, and her investigation skills were impressive. "I have a contact who works in the HOA office," she told me one evening. "They're willing to share some information, but we need to be careful. Sharon has eyes everywhere." The next night, Sophie returned with a USB drive containing financial reports that made for interesting reading. The HOA's accounts showed numerous irregularities, including large withdrawals marked simply as administrative expenses that coincided with Sharon's personal vacation dates. There were also payments to a construction company owned by her brother-in-law, despite no visible improvements to the common areas. We finally had ammunition to fight back with. Unfortunately, Sharon was 2 steps ahead of us. The morning after Sophie retrieved the documents, she called me in a panic. "Noah, someone hacked my laptop last night. All the files are gone, including the backups I had in cloud storage. How is that even possible?" I rushed over to find her staring at a blank screen where her investigative files used to be. It was then that I noticed something odd about her internet router. There was a small device attached to it that definitely didn't belong there. After some research, we discovered it was a sophisticated piece of equipment designed to intercept and manipulate network traffic. Sharon had hired a professional to eliminate our evidence, but she'd made one mistake. She'd left the physical device behind. As I examined the device more closely, I noticed it had been drawing power from an unusual source. Following the wire led me to discover an illegal tap on the power line near Sophie's house. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was criminal activity. But even with this discovery, we knew we needed more than just our word against hers. Sharon had spent years building her reputation and network of influence. We needed something bigger, something undeniable. I looked at the device in my hands, then at Sophie. "She thinks she's already won, but she just gave us exactly what we need." Sophie nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We can trace this back to whoever installed it." I shook my head. "Better than that. We let her think she's destroyed everything while we build our real case. She's gotten comfortable, and comfortable people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes do you think Sharon would make next? Share your predictions in the comments. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sharon had hired a law firm to threaten me with a lawsuit for diminishing property values and noise pollution from my backup generators. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the message was clear: sell your land or face financial ruin. I read through it 3 times, each pass making my anger burn hotter. The generators were only running because she'd had my power cut off in the first place. It was like punching someone and then suing them for bleeding on your fist. But Sharon knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to drain my resources, figuring that a simple rancher couldn't match her legal firepower. That evening, Sharon called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but Sophie attended and recorded the whole thing on her phone. Sharon stood at the podium like a general preparing for war, describing me as a threat to their property values and their children's safety. "That ranch is a magnet for disaster," she declared, conveniently leaving out that the plane crash was a 1-in-a-million accident that had nothing to do with me. She showed photos of my property taken with a telephoto lens, pointing out every piece of equipment and making it sound sinister. Who knows what other dangerous activities he's conducting over there? By the end of her presentation, she had the crowd worked up into a frenzy. Some of the more aggressive residents were talking about taking matters into their own hands. They didn't wait long to act. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of splintering wood. Someone had taken a sledgehammer to a section of my fence, creating a gap large enough for my cattle to wander through. By the time I got outside, several of my cows were already heading toward the road. I spent the next 3 hours rounding them up in the dark, grateful that none had been hit by cars. The perpetrators had been careful to avoid the areas covered by my new security cameras, but they'd made one mistake. They'd parked their truck on the public road, and my cameras had caught the license plate. It belonged to one of Sharon's most devoted followers, a man who'd been particularly vocal at the HOA meeting. While searching for the last of my wayward cattle near the military perimeter, I encountered something unexpected. A military vehicle had broken down, and 2 young soldiers were struggling with the engine. 20 years of working on farm equipment had taught me a thing or two about engines, and I recognized their problem immediately. "Mind if I take a look?" I offered. Within 15 minutes, I had the vehicle running again. Colonel Brooks happened to arrive just as the engine roared back to life. He watched me wipe the grease from my hands, his expression unreadable. "That's impressive work, Mr. Bennett. Not many civilians could diagnose that problem so quickly." We chatted briefly, and during our conversation, he mentioned something interesting. That aircraft was equipped with a sophisticated surveillance system. The cameras were recording right up until impact. We're still analyzing the footage. The significance of his words didn't hit me until later that night. If the plane had been recording, it might have captured more than just the crash. It might have recorded activities around the lake in the days leading up to the incident. Activities that could include Sharon's meetings with the resort developer or her reconnaissance of my property. But how could I access that footage? It was classified military material. I needed to build trust with Colonel Brooks, and I had an idea how to do it. The next morning, I drove to the perimeter checkpoint with a proposal. "Colonel, I know you're working with limited resources out here. I have equipment and local knowledge that might be helpful to your recovery operation. I'm offering my assistance, no strings attached." Meanwhile, Sophie had been busy with her own investigation. She'd managed to record a conversation between Sharon and several HOA board members at a local coffee shop. The audio quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to hear Sharon admitting that she'd exaggerated the danger posed by the plane crash and had redirected some HOA funds to cover legal expenses for her campaign against me. "It's for the greater good," she said on the recording. "Once we get that land and the resort is built, property values will skyrocket. Everyone will thank me." One of the board members expressed concern about the legality of their actions, but Sharon dismissed him. "I've been doing this for years. I know exactly how far we can push without crossing any real lines." But Sharon had crossed lines, and we now had proof. The question was how to use it effectively. We couldn't just release the recording. Sharon would claim it was edited or taken out of context. We needed to create a situation where she would reveal her true nature in front of witnesses. Sophie had an idea. The Silver Ridge annual community fair is coming up. Sharon always uses it as a platform to showcase her leadership. What if we give her a platform she doesn't expect? I looked at the evidence we'd gathered, the financial documents Sophie had managed to partially reconstruct, the recording, the photos of the vandalism. She just signed her own arrest warrant, I said, studying Sharon's house in the distance. But we need to be smart about this. One wrong move and she'll bury us in legal proceedings. What would you do with evidence like this? How would you expose someone who seems untouchable? Let me know your strategy in the comments. The Silver Ridge Community Fair was the perfect stage for our opening move. Sophie had positioned herself near the main pavilion with her phone ready while I waited for the right moment. Sharon was in her element, working the crowd like a seasoned politician, shaking hands and making promises about the exciting future she envisioned for Silver Ridge. When she took the microphone to address the gathered residents, I gave Sophie the signal. She asked a perfectly innocent question about HOA financial transparency, which prompted Sharon to launch into a rehearsed speech about her impeccable record. That's when I pressed play on the audio recording, broadcasting Sharon's confession through the portable speaker I'd brought. Her own voice filled the fairground. I've exaggerated the danger, redirected some funds. It's for the greater good. The crowd's reaction was immediate and dramatic. People stopped mid-bite of their carnival food, turning to stare at Sharon with expressions ranging from shock to anger. Sharon's face went from a confident smile to horror in less than 2 seconds. She grabbed the microphone and started stammering denials, claiming the recording was fake, edited, taken out of context, anything to regain control of the narrative. But the damage was done. Several board members who'd been standing behind her in solidarity suddenly found urgent reasons to distance themselves. One woman loudly announced she wanted to review the HOA's financial records. Another demanded an emergency board meeting. The carefully constructed image Sharon had built over the years was cracking, and everyone could see it. But Sharon Palmer hadn't ruled Silver Ridge for years without learning how to fight dirty. Within an hour, she'd called the police, claiming I had stolen confidential HOA documents. Officer Ryan arrived looking deeply uncomfortable as Sharon presented her case. She produced security footage showing Sophie leaving the HOA office after hours. Though, conveniently, the footage didn't show what Sophie had actually done there. This is breaking and entering, theft of private property, and corporate espionage, Sharon declared dramatically. Despite Ryan's obvious skepticism, he had no choice but to bring me in for questioning. The law was the law, and Sharon knew exactly how to manipulate it. As I sat in the interrogation room, I realized we'd underestimated just how ruthless she could be. The interrogation lasted 6 grueling hours. Detective Martinez, who'd been brought in from the county office, went through every detail of our investigation. He was thorough but fair, and I could tell he sensed something was off about Sharon's accusations. "Mr. Bennett, I've been doing this for 20 years, he said during a break. This feels more like a civil dispute that's gotten out of hand than actual criminal activity, but he had to follow procedure, especially with Sharon's lawyers breathing down the department's neck. They'd even brought in a supposed expert witness who claimed the audio recording showed signs of digital manipulation, though he couldn't provide any actual proof. The whole thing was a masterclass in using the legal system as a weapon. While I was stuck at the police station, Sharon was busy executing the second part of her plan. Sophie called me in a panic after I was released 6 hours later. "Noah, my laptop's been completely wiped. Everything's gone. All the reconstructed documents, the audio files, even my personal photos. How is this even possible?" When I arrived at her house, I found her staring at a blank screen, looking defeated. But something didn't add up. The hack had been too perfect, too complete. That's when I noticed the unusual power fluctuations on my own property's monitoring system. Following the trail, I discovered a sophisticated device attached to the power lines near Sophie's house, a signal booster designed to facilitate remote hacking. The device was professional grade, the kind used by corporate espionage specialists. The implications were staggering. Sharon hadn't just hired some teenager to mess with our computers, she'd brought in a professional cyber criminal. But in her haste to eliminate evidence, she'd made a crucial error. The device had a serial number, and more importantly, it had been drawing power illegally from the grid. That was a federal crime, far beyond the scope of HOA politics. I carefully photographed everything, making sure to document the illegal power tap and the connection to Sophie's internet line. This wasn't just evidence of harassment anymore. This was evidence of multiple felonies. But I knew we couldn't go to the authorities yet. Sharon would have anticipated that move and prepared countermeasures. Sophie's resilience impressed me. Despite losing all her digital files, she'd already started rebuilding her investigation through old-fashioned methods. "I may have lost the documents, but I still remember what I saw," she said, furiously scribbling notes. And I've been getting calls from other residents. Your little stunt at the fair opened people's eyes. Emma Larson wants to meet with us. She says she has information about Sharon's financial dealings that we need to see. Emma was a single mother who'd always kept her head down at HOA meetings, too worried about making waves to speak up. If she was ready to come forward, it meant Sharon's grip on the community was weakening, but it also meant Sharon would become more desperate and dangerous. By evening, Sophie had managed to write and publish a blog post about the day's events. She couldn't include the lost audio recording, but she described what had happened at the fair and posed pointed questions about HOA transparency. The post went viral in local social media circles, attracting the attention of regional news outlets. Sharon's response was swift and calculated. She announced she would hold a public meeting to address all concerns and clear up any misunderstanding. It was a bold move, designed to regain control of the narrative. I stood in my kitchen, holding the signal booster device, studying its sophisticated circuitry. I thought we were winning, I muttered to myself. But I was wrong. She's 3 steps ahead. Sophie looked at me with concern. What do you think she's planning for this meeting? I shook my head slowly. Something big. Something that will destroy our credibility completely. We need to be ready for anything. What kind of bombshell do you think Sharon will drop at the public meeting? Share your theories below. The community center was packed beyond capacity for Sharon's public meeting. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The pressure from Sophie's blog post and the fair incident had created a powder keg of community tension. I could see the divisions clearly. Sharon's loyal supporters on one side, the growing opposition on the other, and a large group of undecided residents in the middle, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Sharon had staged everything perfectly, from the patriotic decorations to the prominent display of her various civic awards. She wanted to remind everyone of her standing in the community before the real show began. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Local media had sent reporters, and I noticed several people discreetly recording on their phones, despite Sharon's attempts to ban recording devices. She'd even hired private security for the event, 2 burly men in suits who stood at the exits like sentinels. It was clear she expected trouble, and had prepared accordingly. What struck me most was the calculated nature of every detail. The lighting was positioned to make her look authoritative yet approachable. She'd even arranged for several spontaneous testimonials from residents whose property values had increased during her tenure. Everything was choreographed to perfection, and I felt a chill run down my spine. We were walking into a carefully laid trap. Sharon opened with a masterful performance of wounded dignity. She spoke about her years of selfless service to Silver Ridge, the improvements she'd overseen, the property values she'd protected. Then she pivoted to the attacks against her, painting herself as a victim of a coordinated smear campaign. I've been patient, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But when someone threatens our children's safety, I can't stay silent anymore. The crowd murmured uneasily. What was she talking about? That's when Sharon revealed her trap. She didn't use fake video, as we'd feared. Instead, she brought out her secret weapon, a mother named Patricia Wells, one of her longtime allies, who climbed onto the stage with tears streaming down her face. Patricia's performance was Oscar-worthy. She claimed her 8-year-old daughter had been walking near my ranch when she'd gotten lost and wandered onto my property. According to Patricia, I had screamed at the child, waved my arms threateningly, and scared her so badly she'd had nightmares for weeks. My baby was just looking for her lost cat, Patricia sobbed into the microphone. And this man terrorized her. What kind of person does that to a child? The crowd's mood shifted instantly. Parents exchanged horrified looks. People who'd been supporting me moments before now regarded me with suspicion and disgust. Sharon stood behind Patricia, radiating maternal concern while hiding a triumphant smirk. Then came the coup de grace. Sharon produced a blown-up photograph on a poster board, supposedly showing the incident. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but it showed a figure that could be me, arms raised, appearing to yell at a small, shadowy form. I didn't want to share this, Sharon said with fake reluctance, but parents have a right to know who lives next door to our community. The photo was perfectly ambiguous. Clear enough to be damning, but blurry enough that you couldn't see details. I knew immediately what it really showed. Me trying to herd a stubborn calf that had gotten tangled in some wire. But to the horrified parents in the audience, it looked like I was threatening a child. The manipulation went even deeper. Sharon had arranged for several other parents to stand up and share their concerns about their children's safety. Each testimony built on the last, creating a crescendo of fear and anger. One father claimed his son was now afraid to ride his bike near my property. Another mother said she'd started driving her daughter to school instead of letting her walk past my ranch. None of these stories could be verified, but in the heated atmosphere of the meeting, facts didn't matter. Emotion ruled the day, and Sharon was a master at playing on parental fears. I watched in horror as years of being a good neighbor were erased by carefully orchestrated lies. The room erupted in angry shouts. Parents were on their feet, demanding action. Some were calling for restraining orders. Others wanted me banned from coming within 1,000 feet of Silver Ridge. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my words were drowned out by the mob mentality Sharon had expertly cultivated. Sophie tried to support me, pointing out the convenient timing and questionable nature of the evidence, but she was shouted down too. Sharon had played on every parent's worst fear, and logic couldn't compete with protective instinct. I felt my legs go weak as I realized how thoroughly she'd outmaneuvered us. This wasn't just about land anymore. She was destroying my reputation so completely that I'd have no choice but to leave town entirely. But in the chaos, something unexpected happened. Emma Larson, quiet Emma, who never spoke up at meetings, was squinting at the photograph with a puzzled expression. She raised her hand tentatively, then more insistently. "Wait a minute," she called out, her voice barely audible above the din. "There's something wrong with this picture." Sharon tried to talk over her to move the meeting along, but Emma persisted. Feed in the background, it fell during last month's storm. I remember because it blocked the road for 2 days. How could this photo be recent if that tree is still standing? The observation was like a bucket of cold water on the crowd's fury. People started looking more closely at the photo, murmuring questions. Sharon's allies quickly tried to redirect attention, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The meeting ended in Sharon's favor, but not with the total victory she'd planned. The crowd dispersed with the image of me as a child threatener firmly planted in their minds, despite Emma's observation. Local parents were already organizing to protect their children from the dangerous rancher. I walked out feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Sophie found me sitting by the lake that night, staring at the dark water where pieces of the crashed plane still glinted in the moonlight. "Noah, we can't give up now," she said softly. Emma saw through the lie. Others will too. I shook my head, exhausted and defeated. She destroyed me in there. Even if we prove the photo was staged, the damage is done. Who's going to believe a man accused of threatening children? But even as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered Colonel Brooks' words about the plane's surveillance system. Those cameras had been recording everything around the lake. If I could get that footage, it might show what really happened on the day Patricia claimed her daughter was threatened. It was my last hope, but how could I convince the military to share classified material? The answer came to me as I watched the recovery crew's lights reflecting on the water. I had to offer them something they needed. How do you think Noah should approach the military for help? Leave your suggestions in the comments. The next morning, I drove to the military checkpoint with a folder full of evidence and a proposal. Colonel Brooks agreed to meet with me in a temporary command post they'd set up near the crash site. I didn't beg or plead. Instead, I laid out everything professionally. The signal booster device used to hack Sophie's computer, the security footage of Sharon's people vandalizing my fence, and documentation of the illegal power tap. "Colonel, I'm not asking for favors," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "I'm offering an exchange. This evidence shows criminal activity that might be connected to your investigation. There are people trying to force me off this land, and they've shown they're willing to break federal laws to do it. That makes me wonder what else they might be capable of." Brooks examined each piece of evidence carefully, his expression thoughtful. I could see I had his attention when I showed him the technical specifications of the signal booster. "This isn't amateur equipment," I explained. "This device costs upwards of $10,000 and requires specialized knowledge to operate. Whoever Sharon hired has access to military-grade technology. That raises questions about what else they might be involved in." Brooks nodded slowly, making notes on a secure tablet. "You're right to be concerned, Mr. Bennett. We've been tracking similar devices used in corporate espionage cases with national security implications." He paused, studying me carefully. "You've done impressive investigative work for a civilian. Most people would have given up by now, or acted rashly. You've been strategic." I sensed an opportunity and pressed forward with my real proposal. What sealed the deal was my offer of practical assistance. "Your recovery teams are working with limited resources and no local knowledge," I continued. "I have heavy equipment, boats, and 5 years of experience with every current and underwater formation in this lake. I can cut your recovery time in half." Brooks leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You're not what I expected from a civilian, Mr. Bennett. Most people would be making demands or playing victim. You're offering a trade." He paused, then added, I can't promise anything about the surveillance footage. That's classified material. But I'll review your evidence and consider your offer of assistance. If you're right about criminal activity connected to this incident, that changes things. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I'd planted the seed. Meanwhile, Sharon was escalating her legal assault. The lawsuit she filed wasn't just aggressive, it was designed to bankrupt me and Sophie. She demanded hundreds of thousands in damages, claiming we'd conducted a malicious campaign of harassment that had damaged her reputation and caused emotional distress to multiple families. The dollar amount was carefully calculated, just enough to force us to sell everything we owned to pay it. Sophie received her summons while we were reviewing Emma's growing collection of evidence. Emma had been busy since the meeting, quietly gathering documents and talking to other residents who'd been silently questioning Sharon's leadership for years. She'd discovered a pattern of embezzlement that went back to Sharon's first year as HOA president. "Look at this," Emma said, spreading out printed bank statements on my kitchen table. "Every time there's a major expense approved for the community, the actual amount spent is about 20% less than what was budgeted. The difference always goes to administrative costs." But, I cross-referenced with public records, those improvements were done by Sharon's brother-in-law's company at the lower price. She's been pocketing the difference. The scale of the theft was staggering. Over 5 years, Sharon had stolen nearly $200,000 from the HOA. But she'd been clever about it, keeping each individual transaction small enough to avoid scrutiny. Only when you looked at the complete picture did the pattern become clear. Emma's detective work was remarkable. She'd spent years working as an accountant before becoming a stay-at-home mom, and those skills were serving us well now. "I always wondered how Sharon afforded her lifestyle on her husband's income alone," Emma explained. "He travels constantly for work, and his company isn't that profitable. But Sharon drives a $90,000 Mercedes, takes monthly spa retreats, and just renovated her kitchen with imported Italian marble. Now we know where the money came from." She'd even found evidence of Sharon creating fake vendor accounts, submitting invoices for work that was never done, and approving the payments herself. It was a sophisticated scheme that relied on residents' trust and apathy about HOA finances. Then I made a discovery that changed our entire strategy. While reviewing property records for my defense against the lawsuit, I found something everyone had overlooked. The single access road into Silver Ridge, the one Sharon used to control who came and went from the development, actually crossed a strip of land that had belonged to my family since the 1950s. My father had granted an easement for residential traffic, but that easement had specific terms. It could be revoked if the road was used for commercial purposes, or if the HOA violated certain conditions. Sharon's plan to turn Silver Ridge into a resort destination would clearly violate those terms. More importantly, I had the legal right to temporarily restrict access for maintenance and safety concerns. I now held a card Sharon didn't know existed. The morning of the scheduled HOA hearing arrived with the kind of dramatic irony I couldn't have planned better. Sharon had scheduled it for maximum impact, inviting media and packing the audience with her supporters. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the previous night using my tractor to stage a completely legal timber accident on that access road. Several large oak logs had accidentally fallen across the pavement during my legitimate forestry work on my own property. The road was completely blocked, and according to the easement terms, I had 72 hours to clear it for safety reasons. Sharon's supporters couldn't get in, but the hearing had to proceed with whoever was already inside Silver Ridge, which included Emma, Sophie, and a growing group of residents who'd been questioning Sharon's leadership. I stood at the gate as Sharon's luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of the log barrier. She emerged like a fury, her perfect composure finally cracking. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her face red with rage. "This is illegal obstruction!" I calmly showed her the property documents and the easement agreement. "Actually, it's completely legal. This is my land, and I'm conducting necessary forestry work. The easement allows for temporary closures for safety reasons." I could see the moment she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, no doubt calling her lawyer. But it was too late. The hearing was starting, and her army of supporters was stuck on the wrong side of a pile of logs. I climbed back into my truck, my hard drive full of evidence tucked safely beside me. "My lake witnessed an injustice," I said quietly, looking at the water sparkling through the trees. "Now it's going to reflect some justice back. What do you think Sharon's reaction will be when she realizes she's lost control of her own meeting? Let me know below." The final hearing began with Sharon strutting into the room like she'd already won. Her confidence faltered for just a moment when she saw the audience composition. Without her usual army of supporters stuck behind my timber roadblock, the crowd was decidedly less friendly. But Sharon Palmer was nothing if not adaptable. She immediately launched into her presentation, painting me as a dangerous outsider who threatened their children and property values. Despite the obstacles certain people have placed in our way today, she said, shooting me a venomous look, justice will prevail. The evidence speaks for itself. She gestured to Patricia Wells, who was ready to repeat her tearful performance about her traumatized daughter. The remaining HOA board members nodded along, though I noticed several looked uncomfortable. The tide was turning, but Sharon still held powerful cards. That's when Noah, Sophie, and Emma made their move. We'd coordinated our presentation carefully, knowing we had one shot to expose the truth. Emma went first, her voice steady despite her obvious nerves. "I've been a resident here for 6 years, and I've stayed quiet too long," she began. "But when someone uses fake evidence to destroy an innocent man, I can't remain silent." She presented the financial documents she'd gathered, walking the audience through Sharon's systematic theft of HOA funds. The numbers were damning. $200,000 siphoned off through fake invoices and inflated contracts to her brother-in-law's company. Several board members gasped as they recognized transactions they'd approved, never realizing they'd been deceived. Sharon tried to interrupt, claiming the documents were forged, but Emma had receipts, bank statements, and contractor testimonials that painted an undeniable picture of corruption. Sophie followed up with her investigation findings, including recorded conversations of Sharon admitting to redirecting funds and exaggerating the danger I posed. But the real shock came when Sophie revealed the cyber attack. Sharon didn't just try to silence us through legal threats, Sophie explained, holding up the signal booster device. She hired criminals to hack into my computer and destroy evidence. This device was installed on power lines near my house, creating an illegal tap that's a federal crime. She'd brought an expert witness, a cybersecurity specialist, who explained in detail how sophisticated and expensive such an operation would be. "This isn't something done on impulse," he testified. "Someone paid serious money to make this happen." The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Even Sharon's remaining allies looked troubled by evidence of actual criminal activity. I presented the security footage of the fence vandalism, showing clear images of known Sharon supporters destroying my property in the dead of night. "These aren't the actions of concerned citizens," I said, my voice carrying the weight of months of harassment. "This is organized intimidation designed to force me off land my family has owned for 70 years. And why? Because Sharon promised investors she could deliver my property for a resort development." I produced emails between Sharon and developers, obtained through public records requests, discussing plans to acquire the lakefront property by any means necessary. The emails were dated months before the plane crash, proving this campaign had nothing to do with safety concerns. It was always about money and power. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Colonel Brooks entered the room in full uniform, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying military authority, "I'm here because evidence has come to light that impacts both national security and criminal justice." He explained that due to the serious nature of the alleged crimes, cyber terrorism, theft of federal resources, and organized criminal conspiracy, he was authorized to share relevant portions of the aircraft surveillance footage. The room held its breath as he connected his laptop to the projection system. "What you're about to see was recorded by the XR-75 surveillance system in the days before the crash." The footage was crystal clear, military-grade resolution that left no room for interpretation. The first clip showed Sharon meeting with a man at the edge of my property 5 days before the crash. Audio enhancement revealed their conversation with startling clarity. "The rezoning papers are ready," the man said. "Once we force Bennett out, we can break ground within 6 months." Sharon's response chilled the room. "I'll create enough pressure that he'll beg us to buy him out. If that doesn't work, I have other methods. That land is worth $15 million for resort development, and I'll get my 10% commission regardless." The man, identified as a major resort developer, nodded approvingly. "Just make sure it can't be traced back to us. Use the HOA as cover for everything." Several audience members gasped at the admission of conspiracy and the revelation of Sharon's personal financial stake. But the truly damning evidence came next. The surveillance system had captured the day Patricia Wells claimed her daughter was threatened by me. The footage showed the entire incident from multiple angles. There was no little girl, there was no threatening behavior. What the cameras captured was me herding a stubborn calf that had gotten tangled in wire, exactly as I'd claimed. The supposed threatening gestures were me trying to calm the frightened animal while untangling it. More shocking was what happened next in the footage. Sharon and Patricia were shown meeting an hour later, with Sharon handing Patricia an envelope. "Remember, your daughter was traumatized," Sharon said clearly. "Stick to the story, and there's another $5,000 after the hearing." Patricia nodded, counting the bills. "Don't worry, I've coached Lily on what to say if anyone asks." The room erupted in outrage as people realized a child had been used as a prop in Sharon's scheme. Colonel Brooks wasn't finished. "This surveillance also captured evidence of multiple federal crimes," he announced, including conspiracy to defraud the government, as Ms. Palmer attempted to file false reports about the crash to federal agencies. He produced documents showing Sharon had tried to claim the crash had damaged HOA property, seeking federal disaster relief funds. These crimes go well beyond local jurisdiction. Federal prosecutors have been notified. At this point, Sharon's composure completely shattered. She leaped to her feet, screaming, "This is entrapment. You can't use that footage. I am this HOA. I made Silver Ridge what it is." Her husband, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and walked out without a word. His departure seemed to break whatever spell Sharon had cast over her remaining supporters. The vote to remove Sharon as HOA president was unanimous among the remaining board members. But that was just the beginning of her downfall. Law enforcement officers entered the room as the vote concluded. "Sharon Palmer, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and cyber terrorism," the lead officer announced. Sharon's screams of protest echoed through the building as she was led away in handcuffs. The HOA itself faced immediate dissolution after state investigators found massive financial irregularities. A judge would later order the entire organization disbanded, returning Silver Ridge to a standard neighborhood without the oppressive oversight Sharon had wielded like a weapon. 3 weeks later, I stood by the peaceful lake as the sun set over the water. The military recovery operation was winding down, their heavy equipment creating silhouettes against the orange sky. The crashed plane had been removed piece by piece, and the lake was returning to its natural state. Residents of Silver Ridge, now free from Sharon's tyranny, had organized a gratitude ceremony. They arrived carrying floating lanterns, each one representing a thank you for standing up to corrupt. Emma Larson approached me with tears in her eyes. "You gave us our community back," she said simply. Sophie was there too, already working on a book about the entire ordeal. "This story needs to be told," she said, "how one person's greed nearly destroyed a community, and how truth really can prevail." As we released the lanterns onto the water, their warm light reflecting off the gentle waves, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The lake that had witnessed so much turmoil now mirrored the calm that had returned to our lives. In my pocket was a letter from Colonel Brooks, thanking me for my assistance and mentioning a high-tech agricultural project the military was developing. "Your skills and integrity impress a lot of people," he'd written. "If you're interested, we could use consultants like you." I folded the letter and put it away, maybe later. For now, I was content to watch the lights dance on the water and enjoy the sound of a community celebrating its freedom. Justice sometimes doesn't come from the courts or the police. Sometimes it falls from the sky in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes a disaster becomes the catalyst that exposes the truth and sets people free. What did you think of Sharon's downfall? Share your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you've dealt with your own Sharon and how you handled it.